Good morning, everybody. I am Captain Jennifer Barrett. I'm with the Brownsburg Police Department. You'll see also that I am a task force officer with the FBI. I work on the Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Squad. We're all undergoing a little bit of change right now. So if any of you happen to need anything on that side, you will see that the best way is to use my Brownsburg Police uh, email.org or the phone numbers that are attached on this first slide. And I do encourage each and every one of you, if at the end of this presentation or anytime in the future that you feel you have a question or you need some sort of assistance, please feel free to reach out. Always willing to help. And our scope is obviously on the FBI side, it's federal, so I can go pretty much anywhere. But on the state side, I'm also on our sexual assault response team for the state. I'm a board member. So any questions there also could probably get you to the right place. Just a little bit about me. So you're going to see a lot when we go through this program. You're going to see a lot of what I like to call just my interviewing techniques, right? So I'm an interviewer at heart. This presentation was really kind of a work of art after I spent so many years working in a male dominated field. That's law enforcement. Those are just the facts. And working in this field as someone who tries to show men when not to be when not to be so gruff, when to be probably a little bit more tactful and mindful of self, especially when we're talking about sexual assault. That had always been something, that and domestic violence had always been something that was, very tricky. You could only get, a male to understand so much in terms of can they put themselves in that position, right? You're going to find a lot of my background. It sort of came into this culmination where I had this epiphany one day after a police action shooting that I investigated in 2016 and had this epiphany and sort of all of this background that I have here came into one little place where I had this moment and I thought, I think I know how to get our officers interested, not only interested, but able to relate to what it would be like to be a sexual assault survivor, be a domestic abuse survivor. This is sort of when you look through this all educational background, all this good stuff, you're just going to see a lot about I am an interviewer at heart. I am obviously a forensic interview of children. I have special education in sexual offender interviews. I'm also a certified forest analyst, which you'll hear a little bit of that. But mainly what you're going to hear is just, I'm pro victim advocacy. I'm pro collaboration with law enforcement, prosecutors, and victim advocates. And I believe that, we have to work towards the bigger picture. And the truth is that's always the victim. It's not about us. So you're going to hear a lot of that and see a lot of that as you go through this presentation with me. Now, I will tell you this there we go. When I did develop this presentation and started traveling and training back in I think 18 and 19 and this is by no means to suggest when I do these comparisons it's by no means to suggest or downplay the experiences of a sexual assault survivor. It was truly to try to find a space in which my officers could relate and they could respond to survivors in a much more human manner rather than one where they're just suspicious and apprehensive and they don't really know what to do. They get very uncomfortable talking about sex and especially violence. So this was just sort of a way that I knew that I could break through and get them to understand the best of their ability what that would look like. By no means am I comparing, a sexual assault survivor to a police action shooting, but I did see that as a path at least to get them to understand. And you'll sort of see as we go through this course. So the objectives for this course are pretty simple. You're going to learn what I developed as on scene we call statement techniques. Notice how it says interview statement. I don't know if I have any law enforcement in here, but what I've done is I've taken away the amount of questioning that happens for a survivor on scene and through the entire criminal justice process. So that's why it says you're going to learn on scene interview statement techniques because we don't really want to interview someone who's just been through a traumatic event. And they're simple and effective for patrol officers. And if there are pitfalls, we know what they are, and I'm teaching them how to avoid them or at least get around them. I will provide you an introduction into the cognitive interview process. I'm going to tell you what it is and how it aids in the minimization of both the misinterpretation and the uncertainty that we often observe in what I will call traditional police interviews, because obviously I'm going to encourage everyone to interview any survivors as what we are going to refer to as the cognitive interview process. No longer will I allow a traditional police interview at my agency or, and of course, I hope that this catches on and many agencies do the same. I will explain factors that affect poor investigative outcomes and how to overcome just simple, honest mistakes because they do happen. We're all human, and these cases, they're very stressful for everybody involved. Everybody's emotions are high, and the tension is high. We all want the best outcome, so mistakes do occur. So I will talk about some ways to get around that. And then ultimately, you're going to hear about how we learn to more effectively utilize and collaborate with our victim advocates. I believe that most of you in this class probably are advocates, so or training to be. And for many years, well before I think the advocacy scene really hit and started proving to be very effective and necessary, I was always someone who really appreciated that collaboration. But because of that, I've been there where we've made a lot of mistakes and we've adapted and overcome and grown from them. So I feel like this is a good presentation to sort of help us learn how to do that and come to the table and just be transparent about who we are and how we're going to work around it. But you're going to hear over and over, I'm always about the victim or survivor comes first. We are going to talk about the intro to cognitive interviewing, patrol's role. And when I say patrol, those are the uniformed officers. A lot of people maybe don't understand the difference. Uniformed officers, aka patrol officers, are the ones that will be the first responders to the report of any sexual assault. And then the detectives are typically those are detectives that wear plain clothes, right? So we're the ones that are dressed like this, usually have our badge and gun on our side, whatever. So for those of you that don't know, and then of course we're just going to do the detective and a victim advocate and how we collaborate. I had to find a way to break through to a majority of people who, for whatever reasons, oftentimes, men they don't consider the things that, women have to consider where we're victimized, at a higher rate than anybody in the nation. They don't do things like, watch their surroundings as they walk through a parking lot or walk through a store. They don't have to consider, what are they wearing? What's the statement by what I'm wearing? Am I safe? We as women every day are so used to having to consider. And so how do you get them to understand what it would be like to even be in a situation where someone afforded somebody a level of trust and then that level of trust was, taken for granted and abused. So it just so happened that in 2017, one of our officers had been involved in a police action shooting. One of my many yes, I'm a public information officer. That is what PIO is. But I'm also an internal affairs investigator. So that's what the force analyst and all that stuff goes with. So when I was investigating this, what I'm doing is we don't do the criminal investigation when it's one of our officers. That's the state police. But I have to do the internal investigation to make sure that all policies and procedures were followed. And we had a couple officers involved. And it was during this process that, I was investigating this case and having to interview them. And, just like you would anything else, we were at a crime scene, we had to collect certain evidence, whatnot. It was then that I started noticing a lot of similarities in their responses to our investigatory actions. I started noticing a lot of similarities in them and how someone who had been sexually assaulted or even a DV survivor, how they felt and often responded when, uniformed officers would come to take an initial report at the scene where it was, a traumatic event. And I started realizing I might have a foot in the door here to finally get them to understand what that would be like, because it's very hard for them to imagine being a victim of sexual assault, right? What I did was I created this presentation for law enforcement, for victim advocates, prosecutors, judges, you name it. I presented this in a way, and I'm going to take you through it so that you kind of understand the hook, line, and sinker. But I presented it in a way where I started with this scenario. I provided them a scenario which essentially just had them, there had been a felony committed and a person fled in a vehicle and they stopped this person and ultimately, the person fled, pulled a pulled a firearm and shot at them, but they returned fire and shot the suspect, okay? So that's really all that you need to know about the scenario. But I set this scenario up for them so that they are in the moment, they're engaged, and they're actually thinking, okay, wow, okay, I've just taken someone's life. So they understand that, everything here. We have the trauma. We have now I have to go through an investigation. I have to answer questions. So I've really got them engaged and it's something that they can 100% relate to, right? So what I then do with them is I ask them, okay, so what will happen next? You've done this. Now we've called out all the brass. We've got the crime scene taped off. We've got your supervisors. We've got everybody there that needs to be there. I ask them, what do your policies say? What do you think happens next? And it surprised me to know that many of them did not know. So many of them had no idea what the department policies were about something like this. They really did not have any lay of the land. They had no expectations regarding what the framework would look like. And that was shocking to me. But where they did seem to be very interested in is what was fair? What did they consider would be a fair investigation that would give them the best outcome possible, right? And this is where it became very interesting, right? Of course, at this point, I start to hear things like, well, first of all, I would want an attorney before I answered any questions. And I'm sure that many of you sit and consider if you've already been doing this long enough, or, if you've even worked with one survivor, you can imagine, wouldn't anybody, before they're questioned by the police, even if you're a survivor of trauma, wouldn't you want to have someone standing next to you and helping you work through that and navigate those waters, especially after you just experienced one of the most traumatic events you probably will ever experience, hopefully in your lifetime? So it's interesting that they 100% expected legal representation right away and would not even follow our policies. Okay. They, because that was fair to them. They did not want to make any statements that they felt would be incriminating. And it went on to when we explained to them, because of course I do talk with them about what you'll find out as a public safety statement. And when we started talking to them about there's this particular line of questioning that you will have to answer because we have a responsibility to the public. They were even shocked by those questions. They felt my officers felt very unsupported. This was one of the words. They felt unsupported. And they felt like they were being investigated. And that is that is pretty much that aha moment, right? And I am certain that you will find that most of your survivors are going to feel that way throughout the criminal justice process. Um, they're going to feel as though they're not believed. They're going to feel as though, law enforcement is investigating them. And to a certain degree, we are, right? To a certain degree. But I found that, they were very guarded, these officers. They were very guarded in this situation. Another thing that I thought was super interesting is, they forgot just the basic rules of crime scene investigation, which is, I may have to take their uniform. Obviously, we're taking their firearms, anything that would have been used at that scene. Removing their uniform is the same as, as asking our survivors to go, submit to a sexual assault examination, with a SANE and remove their clothing, right? And it was interesting how there was all of these parallels. So I go through this with them and, as you can see, they very much are now, they're very invested now in protecting themselves from what they fear will be the twisting of their statements and being investigated themselves, and then ultimately, these statements being used against them later in a court of law, and they just felt unsupported. So I thought, wow, if that isn't exactly what most of our survivors, experience, and unfortunately, we're all here to try to change that. I guess that's the fortunate part. But unfortunately, this does happen more often than not. So I then explained to them, okay, so for the record, here's what really happens. You're going to give a statement to your officer in charge, your shift supervisor. And then the detectives are going to come out. You're going to have to give a statement there. Crime scene investigators as well, because you have to sort of explain where you were in the scene, how many shots you fired, et cetera, right? Departments will require, some require a written report or statement, but they all require a formal statement. And then, of course, we have the evidence, right? We're going to take all of these things, your uniform, whatever. And they really had a very visceral reaction to most of this. So you can imagine when they start seeing, well, how many times am I going to be questioned exactly? Because it's definitely going to change over time. Like some things I'm not going to remember, other things I will. Maybe I remember something later that I didn't remember in the beginning and I don't want it used against me. So they were really able to follow like, wow, this is a scary process even for me. Even when I've done, nothing wrong, I've followed the letter of the law. This is something that I wanted them to see how quickly, being interviewed or required to give statements, how quickly those things evolve. I then sort of go with them because the truth is that everybody expects that police officers, law enforcement officers, they expect that they're going to be the best witnesses in a court of law. And, the truth is we're human. They're like anybody else, right? But after a traumatic event for police officers, some studies came out that, self-reported studies, the perceptual memory issues, two-third reported tunnel vision. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's just literally being able to see as if you're looking from a perspective lens like this. You don't see anything in the peripheral. A third reported auditory exclusion. And what that is it means that your ears, your brain is telling your hearing to lock into only the details that they think are necessary to keep them safe. So, and we all will experience it differently. So if you and I were standing next to each other, and let's say that somebody went to rob us and they pulled a firearm on us, and maybe I was paying attention to the firearm and I was watching their mouth to hear their words, and at some point this suspect fires a shot, but because I'm so focused in on what the mouth is doing, you heard the shot and I didn't. That's just an example of auditory exclusion. A third reported temporary memory loss, and I think that's super important. Temporary memory loss is super common when we experience a traumatic event, and so we've got to allow the brain and our memory time to process and store all of these details that are necessary so that we can recall them when we're asked. But the majority of the affected officers reported a noticeable memory recovery after 2 days. So for those of you that maybe haven't had any sort of education or training in trauma and the memory, we know that after two sleep cycles or so, 48 hours, right? Our brain starts to we do a few things, and I'm not going to get into everything, but essentially we start to encode what's happened, we store it, and then we recall it. So I think the most noticeable thing that I want you to take away from here is that we need about 48 hours after a traumatic event before we start really asking a lot of, deep questions, a lot of those true recall questions. We can get just enough right away to make sure that the public's safe and our survivors safe right then, or, to get them medical attention. But the truth is we really need to give them some time to process because the brain is just not capable of processing trauma in the speed that we would like it to. All right, so why can't we remember? It's fairly simple. Trauma allows us to focus on the central details, right? So the most threatening. I kind of gave you an example of that, rather than the peripheral. Not like tunnel vision, right? But it's the same thing. So that's why you get tunnel vision. That's why you get auditory exclusion. That's why you get temporary memory loss, because what we tend to do is we tend to focus on the most threatening detail rather than anything in our peripheral, anything that our brain says that's not important. That's why, again, you and I may we may watch a crime unfold right at the same time together, but I am going to remember things that you may not, and vice versa. It's just however our brain perceives the threat. And normally in this part of the class, I, ask everybody, can you name an example of an experience that you've ever had that you can say, oh wow, yeah, I know exactly. I know exactly. I had this experience and I remembered some things, but I found out that all these other things happened. And to this day, I don't recall that. That's very standard. That's very common, but this is something that we have to consider every time we're asking survivors of any sort to recall details. Okay. So something to always just, if you remember nothing from this class, I want you to remember this. Trauma affects the way we store our memory. So remember that. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. How we remember, there are three phases of memory. Okay. Encoding, and that is at the time of event. Now remember, There are things that affect that, as I said, what we just talked about, the central details, the most threatening are going to be the ones that go right then. But context, I want to talk about that a bit. Context becomes associated with the event, right? Internal context, what were you thinking and feeling that day? Emotional and sensory associations, and environmental sounds, smells, lightings, things like that. This is really important for someone who does a cognitive interview to understand what's happening at the time that the brain is encoding that traumatic event. Because I can't tell you how many times that I've been able to tap into, okay, so tell me what your day looked like that day. What were you feeling? And how many other small details will come up that our survivor had stored in there and didn't even know that they did. Other things like just asking, well, did you smell anything? We've had situations where, oh my gosh, there was a candle lit. I don't know why I didn't remember that. So just remember, encoding, this is at the time of the event, but so much of this traumatic event that gets encoded sometimes is sitting in there waiting for a key to unlock it. And that's why the cognitive interview is just chef's kiss amazing. And then we store it, right? That is between the event and the interview. So that is between the traumatic event and the interview. And like I said, science says that we need to give them about 48 hours. Now, there are things that we have to consider in that time. Obviously, there are issues of forgetting. I'm never concerned about forgetting. And again, that's because if you're a good interviewer and you're following the science of the cognitive interview and you're at least a decent investigator and paying attention, you know how to use some tools to help jog that memory. Contamination, I do want to talk about that for a second because so many of my victim advocates don't understand, basic law enforcement protocol for interviews and prior to interviews. So contamination is really simple. If you've ever been to the scene where law enforcement has come and they separate you from everybody, they don't want you talking to anybody. That is because we are very suggestive and influential upon each other. And at the time that we're encoding, now that you know what encoding is, if you've just witnessed a traumatic event or you've experienced it as the survivor, when you stand with someone else who possibly is also going to be a witness, the problem is the human brain, it knows that when it's encoding, I'm missing some segments here. Some things are not fitting the puzzle. I'm not able to put the puzzle together. So the brain wants to figure out, okay, how did I get from here to here? So what will happen is because the brain wants to fill in those gaps, they will start listening to whoever has a different perspective. Very soon, their perspective becomes my perspective. And I'm not lying, it's just I got contaminated. And I hope that makes sense. It's about literally, we're very suggestive at the time right after a traumatic event, whether witnessing it and or being the party to it. And it's our minds are very suggestive and influential at that time. So while it would not be intentional, if we find ourselves around another witness or another party who had experienced the traumatic event with us, we will tend to help each other fill in those gaps. And then your memory becomes mine becomes yours, and it's not really the true and accurate representation of what happened. So contamination is a real thing. Law enforcement will separate people. It is not a punishment. It is to protect the integrity of the interview. Also, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, there are several reasons that we don't allow advocates inside interviews. One is the science does not allow it. You'll understand that as we go through the cognitive interview later. But secondly, because we will accidentally participate. Again, there will be no intention to do that. But when you accidentally participate, you accidentally contaminate. And that hurts our survivors and our interviewees more than you can know. And then finally, the third phase of memory is retrieval. And that is what we do in the interview. But as I've already mentioned, a few things that we always try to determine before we even try to retrieve anything from a traumatic brain is how high is the stress? And understand that there will still always be a level of stress if you've been the victim of a trauma. Okay. I'm talking like, are we still to the point where we're not able to get through a sentence without, breaking down? Maybe we're hyperventilating. Maybe we're just still in a phase where we cannot talk. We physically cannot use our words. If we haven't slept, right? In that 48 hours, I need that brain to have those sleep cycles. If we haven't slept and we're still seeing sleep deprivation, I will not do the interview. In fact, we will refer them to, medical professionals so that they can get some treatment to get a few sleep cycles under their belt. I will tell you, I've had to wait as long as I think the longest I've waited was 10 days for someone. Um, and it's always going to be worth it. Now, I know that if I've got prosecutors in here, they hate that. They want their information much quicker. But that is the point of what I'm trying to do. The lesson I'm trying to teach everybody. It doesn't mean the investigation stopped. We can still move forward with all the things that we know, right? Because there was an original statement from our survivors. So it doesn't mean that we're just sitting, in the office doing nothing, but I always want us to respect our survivors' right to rest, to be able to encode, store, and be able to retrieve those memories when asked to do so. So this is just nothing for you guys, but I provided this slide for them to explain to them because at this point, my officers are still like, well, what does this mean? Yeah, so you agree with us. We shouldn't be giving statements and they're going to be used against us. And you're admitting that our brains are traumatized. And so what's the answer? So, I tell them, well, you still have to give a public safety statement. And for us on this side, it just looks like this. The officer who was involved in the incident, we give them that we give all of our officers, it's just a standard format of questions, right? And they ask these questions. They cannot deviate from the questions. And all we're doing is trying to determine if a public safety threat still exists. We have to identify any transitory evidence, of course, at that crime scene, right? So that we can preserve it, document it, and collect it. Okay. We're not asking them to take us through the entire event. We're recognizing that traumatized brain needs it at least 48 hours, right? But we still have a duty to everybody, right? Much like when a survivor calls a patrol officer to report a sexual assault, we still have to make sure that there's not a public safety danger to other people, and we also have to know enough to help treat and or provide the resources that our survivor needs at that moment, okay? But still, we still have to prove, if we'll just say, I don't believe that every single sexual assault case belongs in the criminal justice system, but the ones that do want to move forward, we still have to do our job. We still have to identify that evidence. We have to preserve it, collect it, and document it, right? So, same thing. I explain this to the officers. We still have to do this, right? I show them sort of what their questions look like, right? Have you been involved? Was there anybody injured? Where were you? Blah, blah, blah. And now the officers are starting to feel a lot better because they realize that these questions are very straightforward. They're direct. They're not getting into the weeds, right? They're almost yes or no to some of them, right? So they start feeling a little bit better. They're like, okay, this is not a lot. I don't feel like you can use a lot of this against me. I like that it's short, it's abrupt, it's enough. I'm doing my job to make sure that everybody's safe. And I feel comfortable with this, right? So then I hit him with the big, okay, so you feel like now after the agency and prosecutors and everybody have met all of your needs, we've certainly rose to the occasion and understood that you have a traumatized brain. We wouldn't interview you multiple times, but you understand that there are certain things that just have to happen, right? And they're like, yeah. And I keep them, okay, so you don't want multiple statements, you don't want to be interviewed, all these things, because you have a fear that you're going to have these things used against you. Absolutely. You want legal representation, right? Absolutely. Once I get them sort of on board, I then hit them with the big, okay, so then why are we doing this to our victims? Because this is exactly what, unfortunately, um, if we're not super careful, law enforcement, and that is with prosecution involved, right? Because you'll see some of these go on to the deposition and whatnot. This is law enforcement officers as well as prosecutors. We approach these cases with caution and suspicion as well as urgency. And there is anybody who tells you that a uniformed officer hasn't felt that way. I mean, obviously, as a woman, even as a uniformed officer as a woman answering calls to sexual assault, I still felt a sense of urgency. I could certainly empathize and comfort, but at the same time, I was always worried that I was going to do something wrong, ask the wrong question, not be sensitive enough or be too sensitive because then I get in trouble on the stand, things like that, right? So it's interesting that all of the things that our officers felt when they had put themselves, or I should say, I put them in this use of force scenario, right? They did not like it. They felt as though I was approaching them with suspicion just by my line of questioning, and they felt unsupported. And it's interesting because that is exactly what happens when our survivors are trying to report a sexual assault to law enforcement, right? They're sensing all of those things on top of trying to process this amazingly traumatic event. But as we move forward, like, I bring up to our officers, so think about it. Like, prior to now, we have a policy in place. My officers don't do this anymore since 2018. But prior to that, you would go, and by the way, many agencies still do this. Get the word out. We're trying to change it. Uh, Prior to that, your uniformed officer would come to scene. When they get on the scene, they have these body cameras going, right? So, of course, they're picking up all of our survivors, excited utterances is what we call them. And those can be good, really. But we're also picking up, all different kinds of things that, as you all know, it just sometimes doesn't translate well to juries if we make it to a jury trial. It doesn't translate well to anybody who can't understand what it's like to have experienced a traumatic event in that way. And we all experience it in different ways. We all present in different ways. There is no textbook response to reporting a trauma. Anybody who tells you that there is, no, that's not true. Now, are there responses that we tend to see more often than not? Absolutely. But is there someone out there that I'm sure would probably shock us all one day? Absolutely as well. So you go on, you have your body camera, and then so there's one statement. You have your officers who are typically asking, okay, who, what, when, where, and they're asking all of these questions that quite honestly are overwhelming to our survivor at that scene and unnecessary, right? And then we had the detectives back in the day. It was a mandatory call out for a sexual assault survivor report. Okay. They then come out and then they start asking more questions because your investigators are going to dive deeper. Well, now what are we doing? We're diving into this traumatic brain. Again, we don't have the minimum of 48 hours. And now detectives are really rooting in there, trying to get more information than this poor person can provide. Some agencies, and I should say counties, require, believe it or not, our survivors to fill out a written statement. That just disgusts me. I encourage you all to ask wherever you work. I encourage you all to find out if that is happening there and really lobby against that. There is absolutely no reason for a written statement from a victim of any sort, quite honestly, not to be used in a criminal court. Now, I'm not talking about later when your advocates call and ask if you want to read a victim impact statement. That's different. I'm talking about in the course of a criminal investigation. We should never be asking anybody who's just experienced a traumatic event to write a written statement. Number one, we all tend to communicate when we're in writing as directly as possible. We don't think that the small details of the day will matter. So we're going to make our statement, maybe 3 paragraphs, rather than all of the real evidence that I need. And then, of course, that written statement gets used against them. Well, why didn't you say this, this, and this when So, okay. And then we have the sexual assault nurse examiner's report, right? So I don't know if you guys have had this yet. It's Friday, so I imagine you've already had a same presentation. But in that report, it's very detailed, right? Our survivors are, of course, providing all the details that they were called to the sexual assault nurse examiner, as well as undergoing the medical examination and having, evidence taken from them. And so that report is very detailed. So that is another level of where that statement is. And keep in mind, people, this is all within usually the first 12 hours right away. Okay. So already look, you may very well have four different statements from a traumatized brain in under 12 hours. Are they going to look alike? Absolutely not. Are there going to be some details that sound different? Absolutely. Will there be things added and or omitted? Absolutely. And this is even before we get to what we call the formal interview. And again, we'll talk about traditional police interviews before, but later. But then we have the formal interview, right? By the time that this actually makes it to the prosecutor's office for review to determine if criminal charges will be filed, because luckily in this case, we're going to say that we have caught our perpetrator, right? You've got to already look right there. You have 5 statements, right? 5. And 2 of those are going to be recorded, right? Well, 3, body cam, the detectives, and the formal, all recorded. Very difficult, very difficult. So now you're looking at, if we start at the formal interview and you go up, okay, that's that's 48 hours and less. That's five statements. Okay? That's a lot. We should expect a lot of inconsistencies, but we should also afford that person the opportunity to be able to process that event, and also allow them some grace and understanding that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's we're lying, that we could have a lot of different things happening here. And it's up to the investigator and the interviewer to really dig in if we're seeing differences, and we will. So then you got to figure, when we get to the criminal court process, what does the state love to do? They love to have depositions. So they love to have these defense attorneys like to get the prosecutors together. And then now, what do you think these guys are doing, or girls? So, ladies, gentlemen, whatever. They're getting you and your victim in here, and they have already reviewed those now, 5 to 6 statements. They have reviewed them well, and I can assure you they are more prepared than your survivor. They are then going to ask your survivor questions about things that possibly happened in statements they gave 2 years ago. Because sometimes it takes 2, 3 years for us to get here. And so, what do you think is going to happen? Our survivor is going to answer to the best of their recollection. They're typically not well. I think some prosecutors' office do a really good job at preparing our survivors. Others, not so much. But you got to figure they're here. They're under oath in a deposition. So for those of you don't know, you are giving court testimony. You are under oath. And so what they do with those depositions is, when it's finally time for trial, right? And you get on the stand as the survivor, now look at that. Look at how many times you have: minimal 6 times that you've provided statements and or been interviewed about your traumatic event. And remember, 4 of them, well, we'll say 5 of them we'll just say 72 occurred within the first 72 hours. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I think we can all agree that even 72 hours later, before we get to the deposition, from 72 hours to that deposition, our mind cleared up quite a bit, right? There are some things that we probably have remembered that we didn't remember, some things that we think we might need to correct, or maybe we don't even know we need to correct because we were just firing away at the time because we were stressed and our brain was dealing with a lot of trauma. So you can see that traditionally it's set up for failure for our survivors. And this is what I'm trying to get law enforcement and prosecutors, they're law enforcement, to understand that we set them up for failure with our current system if we're not careful. And then, of course, the conducting of the traditional police interview before cognitive interviewing, that's where a lot of that misinterpretation of what our survivor is saying. And then before you know it, that interviewer is starting to also doubt the survivor because they're misinterpreting what the survivor's saying, or they're noticing holes in certain sequence of events of the traumatic event, right? And they start to look at it like, oh, this person's lying. They're not taking into account that, we have a traumatic brain that we're dealing with here, and how memory records that. Again, they also get super, super, you know, laser focused, and we got to go, we got to go. Now, let me tell you this about the sense of urgency, because for those of you advocates that don't understand, anytime you have a sexual assault, it doesn't matter. I can assure you. Now, the bigger departments, maybe IMPD, your chief probably isn't breathing down your neck, I imagine, but it's probably going to be your sergeant, your lieutenant there. But I can assure you, all of the brass is paying attention, right? And they're in law enforcement. They're in that detective's ear. What do you have? What do you know? So you understand this. Your detectives are answering to their executive staff, their immediate bosses. They're answering to the prosecutor's office, who typically have a lot of ideas about how they want the investigation to go, or they want certain pieces of information, and there's only a certain amount of time that we could serve legal service. They're answering to, here's the truth of it. Not only the survivor, but often the survivor's family and friends start to call in. Now, they get upset when they find out that we can't share things, but then the detectives tend to sit on the phone and have to try to make sure that they understand, like, listen, we wish we could, but we can't, right? So they end up having sort of a counselor role. A lot of distractions through here, a lot of pressure, a lot of urgency. So just keep that in mind as advocates when you're one more person that's calling this detective, and and, asking for updates or trying to, maybe help move the investigation in a direction that better suits the survivor. Just understand that there's a lot of stress and pressure there that's coming from multiple, different sources, and you will just be one of those. So always keep that in the back of your head. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions on that so far? Okay. So this is about, it's very straightforward. You can imagine when I'm standing in front of, a class of, 30 to 50 people. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. So, but believe it or not, there are people that have been here longer than me, and they certainly don't like me trying to challenge any of their beliefs or, their traditions. I will tell you this, law enforcement is rooted in tradition, and some of those are wonderful. Others of those, as I said, I think we need to probably look at and challenge a bit. Interviews are one of them. We are naturally biased as humans. It's just the way it is, including you, me, every person you know. If it's human, it's naturally biased. Now, several things affect our bias, right? The family in which we grew up in, right? Anything that they've sort of, peppered into our head, we've heard. That doesn't mean we live, but we've heard. And I guarantee you, somewhere in there, something that your grandma or grandpa said, somewhere is still lingering in your head, and you don't even realize it's a bias until it comes up, right? The culture in which you live in now and that you were raised in, right? What were your norms and traditions? What's normal for you may not be normal for the person to the left of you, or the right of you, or in front of you, or behind you. Education and life experiences, to include in professional experiences, listen, they sculpt us, they change us. They do add to how we derive to an opinion about something. It's just a fact, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. We all have our own biases. What's important is that we know what they are. So if you know what your biases are, the less likely it is going to be that you project that onto your interviewee. And in traditional police interviews, that is exactly what happens, right? I come in a traditional police interview, I come in as Jennifer, right? Jennifer brings all of this. Jennifer brings her life experiences, her professional experiences, her education, what she feels is normal, her traditions, right? Jennifer should not be doing that, right? I should come in as a cognitive interviewer. I should come in as the state of Indiana, right? As a human who understands that I'm flawed, as a human who understands that I'm here to solicit information from a person. This is just my job. I'm here just to take that information. I'm not here to put my bias and influence on it. Now, the reason this is important is because, like it says, we will unintentionally implant or lead that survivor into giving us information. Okay. And it's very simple. Think about something like this. Have you ever been engaged in a conversation with somebody and our body language, like, we're sitting here and we're shaking our head and we're like, you know what I mean, right? Before you know it, you're going to realize that the person across from you is shaking their head. They may not have any idea what you mean, but they are just going along with you. Yep, yep. So if I am suggesting and suggestful without even realizing it. Most of us are. Okay. And so what happens if you're not very mindful of that when you're interviewing somebody, pretty soon they're going to start pleasing the interviewer. For any of you that have child forensic interviewing in your background, you know that that is one of the biggest things that we try to make sure we don't do when we interview children, right? We know that they're highly suggestive. We know that we can lead them. Well, guess what? We can do the same with humans, right? Science is science. So science still says we can still do that. And I encourage you today, go throughout the rest of your day and evening and see if you can't get somebody just by your influence to do things like shake their head and agree with you and just mimic you. Okay. Because I guarantee you can. You don't even realize you do it. So going into an interview, understanding that we do that to our interviewees, and that doesn't mean anything other than we can get what's called confabulation, right? And that is just a memory error, but it's not an intentional fabrication. And I will tell you this, I think many times when we're interviewing survivors, I think more often than not, we're getting confabulations rather than fabrications. I'm not saying every case I've ever had with a survivor, every interview I've ever had, that there hasn't been fabrication. But again, I'd also submit to you, fabrication sometimes it happens, but I typically know why it's happening. So And in the cognitive interview process, you're going to know it's going to point it out. So um, just just making sure that you all understand that the interviewer is truly they're the lead, but the best interviewer allows the interviewee to take the lead in a cognitive interview. And you'll understand it here in a little bit. But the main thing that I want you to take away is, as I said, we're all biased. Understand that. And it's super important for you to understand that because you'll be biased as your role, respective role, whether it be a victim advocate, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be a prosecutor, whether it be, I don't care. You also have biases and you have to try to start, you know, getting yourself to a place where you're comfortable taking a good look at yourself, take a good introspective look, understand what yours are, because if you do, it will help you develop much better relationships, not only with your survivors, but with your colleagues as you work through the criminal justice system. This is just a little quote that I had that I liked because it just shows back in 1985, for goodness sake, James Stewart, he 100% recognized that information is the lifeblood of a criminal investigation, and it's the ability of the investigators to obtain, and this is what I love, useful and accurate information from witnesses and victims of a crime that is crucial to effective law enforcement. And they're saying that in 85, right? Full and accurate recall is difficult to achieve. And that is again because back then we were using traditional law enforcement interviews. Okay. So we recognized that this was a problem, but yet it took a minute for them to catch up. So along came the cognitive interview, right? I don't know. Okay. I got a question. Okay. What is the overall percentage of sexual assault charges cases that actually go to trial as a felony or misdemeanor? Gosh, I don't know about a percentage. I could tell you, I mean, I could give you a ballpark for where I am. That's probably a really good question for one of your deputy prosecutors or prosecutors in your respective county. I mean, first of all, a sexual assault charge for us, a misdemeanor charge, that would be more like a battery, right? A sexual battery. And they typically don't go to trials. Your felonies will go to trial. And so, I mean, the percentage actually go to trial. Oof. I'm going to tell you it's super low, way lower than it should be. If I had to guess for Hendricks, I'm gonna get crucified if I get this wrong. In my experience, I think I'll be happier doing this. On my cases here at the Brownsburg Police Department, I can give you a rough ballpark. I would say that 30% of our cases go to trial, sexual assault, 30%. That's a rough ballpark for us only. But what a great question. And I definitely encourage you to ask your prosecutor's office because it's very telling. We don't try these cases as often as we should. Now, I'll leave that for a little bit later, but as I already said, I don't think that every case does need to be within the criminal justice system. I think that's really up to our survivor. Sometimes cases aren't as evidentiary sound as we need them to be. And I certainly don't want our survivor to be traumatized anymore. And I mean, we could sit here and talk about, how society needs to, get a little bit better about this victim blaming and whatnot. That's a whole nother probably 8-hour sesh. But I will tell you, we definitely they're not prosecuted at the rate that I believe they should. But again, there are a lot of variables there. I certainly would I would certainly have to look at where the survivor is in relation to is it appropriate to fight it out because we may lose, if that makes sense. Okay, so Edward Geiselman, he's a doctor. He is the co-developer of the cognitive interview technique. This isn't a huge slide. I just wanted you to see it because he actually had some Indiana ties, Midwest ties, and I thought that was super cool because he got his bachelor's at Purdue, went to Ohio University, but he's actually a court expert witness about cognitive interview, and he has 5 books out. I need to probably put that book in here because somebody always asks me. I will if somebody asks me later, I'll try to find it for you. It's just an amazing book, but he used to offer a course. I trained under him. I don't think that he's offering this course anymore. So just keeping that out or just throwing that out there. You do have to get certified in cognitive interviewing. I'm not in a position to certify anybody. This is just me giving you an overview. That's my liability release statement. Okay. So the introduction of the cognitive interview. So the cognitive interview, this is what I think is really important. So if you see it elicits 35 to 50% more information from witnesses. And by the way, witnesses, that also means survivors, right? So it's witnesses and or survivors without affecting the accuracy rate, right? So that tells you right away, why in the world will we do any other interview if we're getting almost 35 to 50, almost 50% more information using this particular style of interviewing? Why would we use anything else, right? It seems silly, other than it is money and a lot of time to get certified. So that is one. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these slides because we're going to talk more in depth, but I just wanted you to see that the reason that this came about because there was just a lot of unreliability in eyewitness accounts, right? And if you've ever been into a jury trial, I've only had it, I shouldn't say only. I've had a few defense attorneys want to talk to me and get me on the stand and ask me about like, well, what do you really know about eyewitness accounts? Can you tell us, like what's the real science say? Of course, well, we've already set it out there for you. Like, it depends on how you're interviewed. It depends on if there was contamination. It depends on if I was biased and unaware and I didn't use the science, right? So they know what they're trying to get you to say on the stand. But the point is that there is unreliability in eyewitness accounts. And that's the whole reason why the cognitive interview was developed. They were, of course, trying to develop methods to improve that retrieval process after a traumatic event. I know that other disciplines use the CI, not just police, but it's really about police because it's about the retrieval of information about crime scenes, right? From the eyewitness and victim perspective. I'd like to think that a therapists aren't diving into the world of CI, but I know that some loosely go there. That can be a little, I'll leave it. But either way, I know that some other disciplines use it loosely. But the CI is primarily something that law enforcement uses. It's just for us, essentially. It was developed for us. And it just says what it is. It's a systematic approach in interviewing. And here's what I want you to pay attention: a cooperative witness. Okay. A cooperative witness. This is this is so wildly important. You can imagine. I can't interview anybody who's not cooperative. I mean, you do, but that ends up looking like a suspect interview, right? If you're in here and you don't really want to be in here and you're only asking my questions with yes or no, we're not going to get it. So I do want to say that we have had survivors who, even when we get into the cognitive, now this is very few, but even when we get in there, they're just not ready. So you know what I do? I terminate the interview because I'm not sure at that point what I'm seeing. Is it because we're just not cognitively ready? Is it because we're still under a lot of stress that I didn't realize before? So I'll terminate it because I don't want to take up, we usually only like to do two, just like child forensic interviews. We don't like to go above two. So I will terminate that so it doesn't count. It is based on scientifically derived principles. And again, we've already talked about that of memory and then being able to communicate that memory, right? So it's how we remember and communicate it as we go into a police interview. So remember, the interviewer is responsible to elicit that information though. So it's all the pressure's on the interviewer. That's the other thing I like. It's not on our survivor. They're just there to take control and they sort of guide it, but the interviewer has to know their stuff. So this is just, I've already told you it's a method of interviewing, but I think the thing that I want to just make sure that you understand, it's to enhance the process of memory retrieval, right? And it's to enhance the possibility, or I should say, it's to use tools to help bring forth memories that they didn't know that they were storing without getting inaccurate accounts or confabulations. So these tools are truly, again, based in science on how to help the survivor get to a place that they didn't even know was there. And often, as interviewers, we don't know it's there either. We're just using the tools to try to see if it is. So this is one of my favorite slides, really. If you've ever been interviewed by law enforcement, whether I hope, hopefully it wasn't a suspect, as a suspect, but no judgment if it was. But if you've ever been interviewed at all, it's very, it's very stressful. Already typically are coming to a police department, right? You're coming in, you're coming into a secure building and you're being taken into a small room where there's usually just a table and two chairs, right? And it's stark and it's Now, I will say the Brownsburg Police Department interview rooms are lovely, just so you know. But I've seen some other interview rooms, a little scary, a little gross. So just imagine already that if we are a survivor and we're having to come do a cognitive interview, what that standard interview room looks like, just being escorted through a secure building, that already is adding to the pressure and the stress that you're feeling, right? I always suggest that any cognitive interview that we're going to do, you need to make sure that it's going to happen in a location that looks much like a child forensic interview room, right? I prefer it to look like a living room. A soft interview room is what we call it. I prefer there to be a couch. I like an easel. I still use it in my cognitive interviews. I find it very effective. It's amazing how effective it is if I hand somebody a marker and I start allowing them to sort of draw the scene for me. It's wildly progressive to watch how their memory then starts to unfold. I always suggest, have a soft interview room. Please do not take your survivors into a stark interrogation room, okay? Because that's what those are. Truthfully, those are interrogation rooms. I don't take any witness or survivor into an interrogation room. I always take them into a soft interview room. We have 2 here. We have numerous interrogation rooms, but they never see the light of day in those. So I wanna make sure that we understand that. Just right there, that's setting the stage, that's setting the stage for that psychological perspective of what we should be doing for our survivors and our witnesses. Okay, so you come in, and I'm just going to show you just a quick difference between traditional police interview and the cognitive interview. So a traditional police interview is you come in and we're going to build rapport with you, right? So, we're going to say, okay, where did you go to school? Where did you grow up? Oh, yeah, me too, right? So the truth is that rapport on the traditional police interview side, if it takes 5, 6 hours, it does not matter. If you are someone who, let's say you have murdered your family, I don't care if you need me to sit there with you for 12 hours till you decide you like me and trust me. I'm going to do that. I'm going to build that rapport with you as long as it takes so that the people that you have harmed get justice. Okay. So rapport can go wherever as long as you need it to be in a traditional police interview. Okay. In a cognitive interview, that is not what it is. In a cognitive interview, when I bring the survivor or witness into my soft interview room, I'm very quick about it. I make sure to introduce myself. I make sure that they, do you need it? Here's your water. I usually have water in their form, things of that nature. I sit, the easel is between us. So they're usually on a love seat and I'm in just like a big chair over here. Easel's in between us. And I have Kleenexes, I have water, I have all the things prepared. I just introduce myself and I explain to them that this is a cognitive interview and I am certified to engage in a cognitive interview. And I then give them what is called interview prep instructions. They're real simple. I tell them, I just want you to tell me about the event wherever you decide, start wherever you want, and I want you to be as detailed as possible. There is no detail that I will think is silly. I want you to give me every single detail. Even if you think it makes no, like it wouldn't be relevant to me, I want you to tell me. Be very complete. Finish your sentences. But I tell them, I also want to know, give me context behind wherever you start. So if you're going to tell me about, well, I got up that day, tell me how you felt. What did you feel? Was it raining? Was it cold? Did that put you in a bad mood? So all my rapport here is just basically telling them, here's your prep instructions, be complete. But more importantly, in the rapport, I am making sure that they understand the first thing that I tell them is, you're in charge in here. I am here to take notes. So when I explain to them before I get to be complete, reinstate context, right? I am sitting there with a big legal pad in my lap. And I explained to them, I will be taking copious notes. That is part of this process. I am not ignoring you. It is me trying to take notes because it is part of the process that I will have to, at the end of this, I will have to read these notes back to you so that you can correct me. You can make edits, additions, whatever it needs to happen. I am not ignoring you, but I make sure that they understand I am merely a note taker in here. I am here to provide some guidance, but you are on complete control. You can stop when you want, you can start when you want. And the whole point about rapport here is this takes me about 5 minutes, sometimes 10. It's literally just making sure that they understand that they are in control in this room. I do not have the power and control in this room. I give it all to them. You can imagine that after being sexually assaulted, you certainly feel stripped of all power and control, right? So it is one of the most, I think, one of the most empowering things I can do for them is to make sure that they understand that you truly are guiding this interview. I'm the scribe for now, and I will be the person that interjects with some tools to see if I can't help, maybe jog a memory here or there. But other than that, you you run this interview. And it is so amazing to see how immediately I watch the shoulders drop. I watch them get comfortable in their seat. And usually right around here, I don't want to say usually, a good percentage of the time, tears of relief, you know, start to fall. And I think if there's ever a moment in a cognitive interview where I know that this is the right application, it's then, right? It's knowing that they are now comfortable in my presence. They understand that they are in charge, and it's quite possibly one of their first, positive interactions in this entire process. But more importantly, it's positive interaction with law enforcement, and which is already a scary interaction, right? So, rapport looks very different. The narrative report. So, in the narrative report in the traditional police interview, I am letting you tell me whatever story you are going to tell me, right? Like I'm letting you, but I will jump in. So if you start to tell me, okay, so, Sally and I were, at, Bricker's Pub, and it was about 12 o'clock, blah, blah, blah. I might, in here on the police interview, traditional police interview, I might say, okay, hold on, hold on, hold on. How did you and Sally get there? Right? I might interrupt to ask some information clarifying questions. On the narrative report and the cognitive interview, I let them finish to completion. We will talk about segments. I do have them segment out. I let them just flow. I never interrupt. And copious notes, right? Copious. And I do not interrupt. Again, they're in charge, and you don't interrupt the flow of where their memory wants to tell them on the retrieval. Okay. So, very different narrative reports here. When we go to specific questions for the traditional police interview, when I'm asking you a traditional or a specific question in a traditional police interview, typically those questions are to sort of lock you into a particular piece of your story, right? I'm, asking you, okay, so again, where were you when that happened? And where did you park your car again? What time was that? So specific questions in a traditional police interview, this is where a lot of people that in a narrative report in a traditional police interview, that's where they start to feel, oh gosh, you're suspicious of me. Like you don't believe me. You are not on my side. That's because they are set up to not recognize that we should not be interrupting. We should not be specific questions are fine as long as they're asked in a certain way, right? But here, this is where traditional police interviews, that narrative report and that specific questions, this is where people start to get that uh-oh moment. And I feel like you're against me moment, right? And specific questions on the cognitive interview, all I'm really doing is I might have them do a couple of things. Like I might say, okay, when you were talking about what we call the traumatic event or the assault event, right? The abuse scenario. I might say, okay, let's start from, you had just got thrown on the bed. Now let's go backwards. I want you to reverse that order for me. You know, they look at me at first like, what do you mean? Like, well, just take what did you do right before? Like literally what happened right before he threw you in the bed? Walk me backwards. This is such an amazing thing for two reasons. Number one, I can see that they're really focusing, and they will tend to catch things that they didn't catch before because they were trying to go through the story so quick, and they were trying to give me the abuse scenario in such a very direct communicative way, right? Using the least amount of words and the least amount of, description. When I take them backwards, they can't help but to recite things that they had already felt, in their own brain they had sort of polished out before, right? So reverse order is really amazing. They start to say things that they didn't say before, and it's not because they're making it up, it's because I'm making their brain, take a path that hadn't been taken before. And so they no longer possess the ability to filter, what I like to call filter what they think I need to know. And we all do that. We all filter what we think somebody needs to know. And it's not because they're trying to lie to me. It's because they're trying to be direct communicators. They don't think that I need to know, oh, yeah, so when he hit me, uh, I know that blood splattered on the wall over here. They're not thinking like that. They're thinking he hit me and I tasted blood. That's it. So reverse order is just such a phenomenal tool. But the other thing about reverse order that is super important for any law enforcement people out here, because so many will say, you can't use cognitive interviews, you'll never know if they're lying. Well, that's actually completely false. In the reverse order, that's exactly where you see that they can't. They can't go in reverse without making a lot of mistakes, right? You will then start to see the breaks. Okay. And so cognitive interviews can actually even be used on suspects. And by the way, I use them. I use techniques of cognitive interviewing on my suspects, and I have a really good confession rate. Just saying. Um, Not to pat myself on the back or anything like that. I'm saying the science works. I don't know that it's me, it's the science. The point is, reverse order will show you if somebody is fabricating. The brain is not able to put it in that order because you've now challenged it. Because remember, when we go to tell a lie, what do? We practice it one way over and over. We tell the story from the beginning to the end, from the beginning to the end. We don't go in the middle and go backwards. We don't do that. So the brain cannot change tracks. It cannot change path. It cannot go backwards because we practice it one way. Okay. So change of perspectives is another thing that I'll do for specific questions. And many of you who, if you are child forensic certified, you know that we'll do this. Like, let's pretend like you're a helicopter in the sky, or I think back in the day, spider. You're a spider up in this corner in the ceiling of the room. What does the spider see? So that's what I do with them. I'm like, okay, now hold on. I will ask about that perspective. Like if there's a helicopter above, what do they see? This is where I tend to bring out my, not every interviewer will do this, but I bring out the easel. I'm like, here, show me. It makes things so much easier, not only for my interviewee, but for me as well. I can sort of transport my place to that sort of space, right? So on top of that, they then start, oh wait, there was a coffee table over here. Oh my gosh, I bet that's where my keys are. Things like that start to unfold as they actually draw. So changing of perspectives is super important. Now, another way that I change their perspective is not just the helicopter. I will ask them to now be the offender, right? Okay, if I'm the offender and I'm on top of you, where's my right hand? This is also such an effective tool because oftentimes, our survivors can tell you that I know I like they'll describe force and they know they've been held down, but they can't quite explain how they were held down, right? They don't know if it was a hand or a knee because it doesn't make sense to them. So sometimes when we change perspectives, it starts to make sense to them. And I cannot tell you how many times people have been like, oh my gosh, that's right. His arm was up over here. So changing perspectives and specific questions is one of the other amazing tools that very different, vastly different. Again, specific questions police interview, specific questions cognitive interview. Traditional interview review. Traditional police review looks like this. I am then going to start telling you all the reasons in which I'm going to start pointing out all the holes in your story. Now, this is even if let's say that this is an investigator who wants to believe the 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 survivor. But remember, they've come in biased. They've used a police interview technique that predominantly is for suspects, right? Because it's the only thing that they know. And now they're reviewing, and their minds are very unaware that they have just brought their bias into the room. They're actually thinking that they're doing the right thing. They're going through just a very matter of factly, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. You said, how did you get from here to here? And wait a minute, where were you had underwear on here, but now you don't? So in their review, they're asking questions that now start to look accusatory, right? And this is when your survivor is like, oh, wow, I'm now victimized again. Review in a traditional police interview, while it's not meant to be that way, it just is because their methodical brain with that limited scope of interviewing technique can only go one way, right? It can only go down the list of things that we need for evidence, the list of things that we need to fill the gap. That's what they're doing. In review for me and the cognitive interview, guess what I'm doing? I'm literally reading every single word back to my survivor that I've segmented off because sometimes we're just going to talk about the abuse scenario and then we might go to the morning of. So I literally go and read back every single word. And I tell them, you correct me, you interrupt me, I don't care. This is your time. And in that review, it is so refreshing because that's when it's the first time they get to hear their words coming back, being recited. And there's so much clarity in that for them that they will, my goodness, they would like, no, 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 no. Okay, wait a minute. I did say that, but here's the thing. That's not really how it happened. They will then start to correct you. They will then start to add things. They will start to clarify things. The review is a powerful, powerful exchange. Well, it's really more like I'm absorbing it. It's not an exchange, but the review is all about power. It's all about correction. It's all about accuracy and very different than the other. So traditional police interview closure looks like this. They're going to tell you, yeah, okay, well, here's what we'll do. They're going to tell you the next investigative steps. We'll be in touch, right? My closure on cognitive interview looks like this. I want to thank you for coming in. I know that this was a difficult time. We may have to do this one other time. I'm not sure right now. I'm also going to need time to process everything from this interview. If in the meantime you remember something or you feel as though you need to correct something, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or the victim advocate. Closure is very different. We walk out, we're a team. We came in, we were a team. There is no question on we are a team in a cognitive interview. In a traditional police interview, you walk in scared, you walk in, under tremendous pressure, and you walk out thinking that you are being investigated. I'm not saying all are like that. Here's my disclaimer for other law enforcement. I'm not saying that all of you interview like that. I'm saying that the majority does. So, okay, before we take a break, are there any questions about the traditional police interview and the cognitive interview comparison? Not here to try to teach you cognitive interview process. I just want you to sort of have a comprehension of what it is and how it works, especially dependent on, again, on your discipline, wherever you're coming from. It just might be something that you might consider, when you are working with a survivor, just asking, is anybody in your agency cognitive interview certified? Will the survivor be, subject to a cognitive interview, or is it traditional police? I mean, not that they're all, I hate to say it like this, but I don't want to give you the impression that all traditional police interviews are, you know, weaponized, because they're not. Um, I'm just saying that the CI process is obviously, we know, a better process for witnesses or survivors, victims, right? So I just want you to look at this. Wait, sorry, raised hand. Okay. Did you mean to raise a hand?
Yes, you talk about like weaponizing interviews. I've actually seen that done. I was shadowing a client from our legal team, and I literally watched them like say, "Well, you told this officer this thing, but you told that officer that thing. Why didn't you tell them that?" And literally just like pick apart every statement she'd ever made. But she was in different states of the process of, like, what she could think about. The first cop she talked to was literally in a hospital bed, and she didn't know how she got there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. I try not to, again, they're not all weaponizing, but they can be weaponized. And that's why I try to show you that traditional police interview in comparison to the cognitive interview. I could pick apart so many things on what you just said right there. The fact that, I mean, the way our policies and our response work here for my investigations division, my detectives do not go to the hospital unless our survivor is potentially going to, die from the injuries. We literally try to protect that statement from that exact thing from happening, right? So many law enforcement agencies believe that, oh no, we've got to go out there, we've got to send a detective. Okay, for what? You know, I challenge this in every live class I have, and I can assure you, and if I've got prosecutors in here, I'm sure somebody's going to want to have this debate today, and that's fine. I'm prepared for it. They'll challenge and say, "No, we need to serve search warrants. We need this. We need that statement right away." Well, what is going to the bedside going to change from what the initial officer got on the scene? You see what I'm saying? Unless we didn't get a statement at all on the scene because we loaded the survivor up into the ambulance and went to the hospital, then I can understand that. But my point is that, like, you can't unknow what you know in law enforcement, right? So if we keep putting sworn law enforcement officers in front of these survivors and asking them question after question, whether it be bedside or at the scene or whatnot, in the ambulance, it doesn't matter, right? We know that those answers are going to look different. And so then to weaponize it and say, but wait a minute, your story changed from here. You told this officer this, you told this officer this. Yeah, you should expect that. Again, if there's not been 48 hours at least before we start asking these deep probing questions, I can guarantee you those answers will change. The stories will not add up. Again, I could go on and on. I think I just trying to say that, like, I'm not saying that every single time when you have a traditional police interview, is it meant to be weaponized. I just think that this particular process, comparatively speaking, I don't think that traditional police interviews are effective when we're working with survivors. That's my professional opinion. I don't mean to upset anybody out here who thinks differently, but I don't mind a good challenge. So, I mean, we can do it all day. If anybody's in here and they want to have that, we could do it. Um, convince me otherwise. Convince me otherwise that that a traditional police interview is better than a cognitive interview. It's just not. It can't be. They have their place though. So I think that's what I was just wanting to make sure you guys understood. Traditional interviews 100% have their place. Absolutely do. This is talking about when we have a traumatic brain and we're dealing with trying to elicit information from a traumatic brain and we're having to understand how trauma affects the brain and the retrieval. If we're not doing that, then we're already setting the entire case up for failure. So, again, traditional police interviews do have their place. I just do not believe that they have a place when we're interviewing survivors. I hope that I hope that makes sense, and I hope I'm not hurting every law enforcement officer's feelings that's in this class because that's not my intention, but I am intending to challenge your mindset a bit and just maybe be open to, something different that might be better for the case and might be better for the survivor all around. So there we have it. Okay, I just feel frisky on this Friday. I don't know. Okay, so I'm just going to show you just some of the retrieval methods. Again, this isn't really for. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds with you guys because I'm not trying to get you to perform one of these. I just want you to sort of, sometimes for me, it's like if I can see it and I can understand, how it's applied, then I get the benefits of it, right? So really what it starts out with, the retrieval method look like this, and I'm just going to go straight to the explanation slides. Okay, so right here, the middle reinstatement, environmental and personal context. And if you remember, I kept saying that over and over, the context. I try to make sure that, when we're going through these, that the survivor understands context is everything in these. So don't leave out those little details. They always, if you've heard the saying, the devil's in the details, right? You'd be amazed at some of the things that they have omitted before. And then when they finally say something, it was the one thing that they didn't know that I knew. I just didn't realize that it was relevant piece of information or evidence until they said that, right? So it's interesting. It's all in the details. So this is where I'm just trying to get them to mentally reinstate their environmental and personal context from surrounding the scene and surrounding that day, right? So I just ask them things like, okay, so what did that day look like? I've already told you. We talk about, were you agitated that day? What'd you eat? What'd you drink? What was the weather like? So I'm literally just getting them there, right? Because as we all know, our moods and and various other things can affect really how we're perceiving so many things, right? So I try to get, if you're someone who you love it when it storms and it's storming that day and and you woke up happy and you had the best cup of coffee ever, I already know where you are contextually speaking that day, right? Like I kind of have a better insight. And that will affect how we move through your interview. But we ask to use all the senses, right? And this is also, I love this one because so many times, when I ask, like, did you hear anything? They don't think about what they heard, what they didn't hear. Did they smell anything? They don't think about things like that. So often, as I said, you'll hear me say it over and over, we tend to want to communicate in the most direct sense. We tend to filter out the things that we think aren't important. And if you are someone who has come in to, talk about your sexual assault, chances are you're going to want to get through it quick, and you're going to want to tell me enough details just to show me that yes, this didn't need to happen, and this is the person that did it, and this is how they did it. You're not thinking that all of the other details make sense, and believe it or not, can make and break a case. So I love using the senses. Another way is we talked about this, the different perspectives. And I'm not going to spend tons of time here, guys, because we've already done this, but I just love the perspectives. As I told you, some people have said, my gosh, you're going to ask them to see a perspective from the perpetrator. And oh, that seems horrible. Well, the truth is that I've never had anybody feel uncomfortable with that. In fact, it's almost like a light bulb goes off for them, and they are so often able to sort of work through some of the positioning, some of the other things from that. Like it's amazing how many epiphanies they have when they go from that particular perspective. So I know that people have asked that seems harsh, but it actually I've never had anybody have an issue with that, and it's been very successful. And then of course describing the event in several orders. This is one I already told you. You know, working backwards is something that is very beneficial. It helps them recall things that they had already filtered out and maybe they didn't even know that they had. And then of course this is that place where if they are fabricating something, this is where you will tend to see that will be revealed here. The in-depth reporting, I've already told you every detail. I always tell them, I don't care if you think it's irrelevant or trivial, right? Like this is super important, and I can tell you, like, I can't tell you how many times that something that seems so irrelevant to them, they say in their cognitive interview, and I made note of it maybe on the scene or through maybe, maybe it was a legal service. Maybe I was coming through legal service return from, a search warrant. I was going through text messages or something. And I just couldn't, I was like, that means something, but I don't know what it means. We've all been there, right? We're like, I know that's important, but I don't know why yet. It's oftentimes in here when they give you a detail that they would have normally filtered out that I'm like, oh my goodness, bingo, I got it. And then it's the smallest of things. Truthfully, it's the smallest of things to help us shift from, I think the thing that we probably at this point, I'll say, most of our sexual assaults here, at least, again, I like to just talk about the Brownsburg Police Department here in Hendricks County, right? The majority of them they are known perpetrators. They know they're perpetrators. So they're either, they're non-consensual reports, right? Most of them, the majority of our sexual assaults do not describe an element of force, right? They usually are a date rape situation or, of course, being drugged, things of that nature, right? Uh, and a lot of times they psychologically didn't want to do it, but they and I don't like to use the word consent, but they complied, if that makes sense. Not consented, but complied because mentally they weren't prepared to do that. We get a lot of that. We don't get a ton here in Brownsburg of, I don't know who my perpetrator is. That's very rare. And why that's important, circling back around, why that is important is because, again, when they tell me about those little details, it certainly can make a difference in, when the perpetrator says, "Oh, this was total consent." It's interesting how the littlest of things, and then it takes me back to a place where I'm like, haha, no, see, she or he was not in a mental place to provide consent. So just something to consider. I mean, I know that everybody looks at things differently, but on the in-depth reporting, when I ask them for all the details, you do have to be prepared to write a lot. You do have to be prepared. These interviews, I don't know if I've mentioned this, they take anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. I try to not let them go more than five because it's very exhausting for both them and the interviewer. I talked about just like there's some supplementary techniques. So this is like if you had, a perpetrator that you did not know and there was just not like maybe they were masked or whatever, right? And they just didn't have a lot. So I'll do things like, did they remind you of anybody you know? Now, if they say things like, "Oh yeah, John Smith, he was my neighbor when I was 5," that does not help for me, right? That's a no-go for me. But so I'll tend to do, what about somebody I would know, like anybody in Hollywood? Is there any actors that we could pull up that you could show me, right? Any unusual words? I ask a lot about accent. I ask a lot about, stutters, things like that, right? But I also something that I think is important, I also ask a lot about smells and, like, "Well, did you smell anything?" People forget to say things like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, he was wearing, like, polo from when I was in high school," It's interesting. And then I go serve a search warrant, and there he has his polo there, and he's drenched in polo when I interview him, smelling like the 1985 king that he was. Anyhow, okay. The sequence of cognitive interviewing, it's just like I told you. The introduction. I am telling him we are a team. You are in charge. Please be complete. I do want context and open-ended narrative. Remember, I told you use your own words. Tell me everything you can in full detail. Probing memory scenes. This is where I talk to you about segments. I let them start wherever they want. So if they want to start right at the abuse scenario, well, okay, so we just got back to my apartment and this. I let them start there. I don't let them skip though. So, like, I make them tell me that entire abuse scenario. Then I'll direct them to say, "Oh, before you did that, like, tell me what your day looked like. What time did you get up?" Right? So that's how I start. So I'll segment that part off. Okay, then you went to work. Tell me about work. That's another segment. Okay, then you came home and you got ready for, the date. Tell me about that, right? So I do not allow these segmented scenes to ever skip. And I always let them go fully before moving on. Okay. You already know about the reverse order, change of perspective. The reviewing we've already talked about. They have that chance for accuracy and then last memory recall. And then we walk away with great impressions of each other, right? We know that we're working together as a team, less, somebody walking away feeling as though they are under suspicion, aren't believed, and they understand that, hey, I might have to come back because maybe something else comes up in the investigation that, they need to, probe further. Or maybe it's just that I didn't do as well as I could have and I need another sleep, right? All the same. So here's what I did. I now, here at the police department and now several agencies, thankfully, to partly ICASA and State SART and everybody else, right? I now had, back then, I developed this, applying this public safety statement for law enforcement officers to sexual assault investigations. It's real simple. You don't have to go interview somebody right then and there multiple times. Aren't we really just trying to find out, A, does our survivor need immediate medical attention? Are they safe? And what about, are there more victims? Or is there a chance that there's going to be more victims? Is somebody armed and dangerous, right? Super simple, right? So the threat assessment I'll show you what it looks like, but we need to be asking very, very direct questions to our survivors, just as we do to our officers in the event that they were in an officer involved shooting, right? You as a citizen, we would ask you the same things. It's very short, it's very sweet, but it doesn't lock you in on anything, right? It's just enough to determine what is our next course of action in this exigent circumstance. How do we best serve you, but also serve the investigation without losing the integrity of it, right? And yes, evidentiary concerns, because this is where my prosecutors like to say, if we don't, so for instance, we get this a lot. If it were, say, a situation where maybe Jane had dated Jack. They dated a year ago, and then he called her up, he wanted closure, she met him for dinner, and we'll say that of course, he we believe he drugged her, and then he followed her back to her apartment, the sexual assault occurred. And now here she is, saying, "Hey, I was sexually assaulted by Jack. I know who he is. I believe he drugged me." And now we're sending Jane to the hospital, right, for her sexual assault examination. Some prosecutors like to say, "I can't believe that you would not send out a detective to interview her right away." Well, my point is what am I gaining? What, like, they've already provided, Jane has already provided the basic who, what, when, where, why, how, okay, to my uniformed officer. What am I doing for Jane or the public that is changing anything? We know who Jack is. We know where Jack lives. We know the method in which Jack used to assault Jane. We don't believe that there's a danger to the community at this point, right? What am I gaining by going and asking Jane to give me yet a more detailed statement that I know is going to be used against her? What am I gaining there? Like, I have everything I need. If I need to serve a search warrant, I can do that. Jane's already given me all of the elements of probable cause that I need. And if not, guess what? Jane's going to give that to me in about 48 hours anyhow. I've already done my public safety assessment threat and it's low. So are there concerns then that, okay, he goes and yes, we lose the ability to serve a kid on him. Okay. Well, we all know more than likely Jack's going to say this was consensual, right? So the absence, we also have the evidence on or in her, right? So that's probably already there. don't necessarily need Jack. I will probably have Jack on or, contained somewhere biologically, potentially with Jane. So what do I need to do? Are there search warrants I can serve? Absolutely. You know what I'd start doing? I'd start pulling cell phone. Like I'd start getting on my cell phone. I'd start getting my social media, all of the relevant information. If she says, yeah, we started texting. Okay, Jane, can I have your phone? Because I want to do a cell phone dump, right? I'm then gonna serve a search warrant for his cell phone, right? Like I can do all of those things. I'm not losing anything by waiting for Jane's traumatic brain to catch up with my investigation. Jack is not out here doing anything differently. Hopefully, he doesn't do this to another woman in the next 48 hours. But nonetheless, one of the last things that I ever do is interview Jack. I can tell you, as an investigator and an interviewer, you don't sit across the table from somebody in an interview and ask questions that you don't already know the answers to. That's a no-no for suspects, okay? Period. For suspects. So, yes, are there some things that we have to consider gain versus loss? Yes, I think that you have to then, and every case is a case-by-case scenario, right? I think that you have to weigh that at the time that they come up. But I think that the benefits of not asking our survivor to provide multiple recorded statements while recalling from a traumatized brain and memory, I think that that is more of a gain than anything ever, especially when you consider the fact that so few of these cases actually get prosecuted. And that's where we go back to not every case makes it into the criminal justice system, and not every case needs to be there. But we still have to protect the process, and we have to do what's right for the survivor. And I always would love to bring a case to a jury trial or a bench trial, or I'd love to bring somebody to justice. But the truth is if my survivor is not prepared to do that, or if we don't think that if we think the harm to the survivor is going to do more than the good it would do for somebody to be convicted or potentially go through trial and not be convicted, right? It's always a gain versus loss. But the mindset is, let's start shifting the focus and concern to the survivor rather than rather than all these things that we think we have to do with a sense of urgency that we really just don't have to do. If you if you truly take every case and you weigh it on a case by case and detail by detail, you're going to find that you're going to probably get more exponentially more evidentiary information that's going to lead you on a bigger expedition for further evidence after you get that wonderful cognitive interview. I'm always going to tell you your gain is going to be much bigger if we do it this way. Your loss. Okay, so maybe we lose a used condom or a condom wrapper. I don't know. I haven't done that yet because I'll tell you what, what happens when people throw things away? Just know when the trash schedule is. Get a search warrant and go pull the trash. We found victims' underwear there before, all the things, right? You gotta kind of be prepared to think out of the box, and you gotta challenge that old school way of thinking. Just because we've done it this way all the time doesn't mean we need to continue to do it that way. And yes, we have to be prepared to maybe lose a little bit of something right then in the hopes that we're going to get more from the cognitive interview. I say it's better. This is kind of what it looks like for my patrol officers. What they do is this: when they show up, you know what they get to do? I want them to keep their body cams rolling, right? But they mute them. I want to protect my survivors from having that statement used against them. You're still getting all of their emotion or lack thereof, depending on who we're dealing with. You're still getting all of that. But I don't like them when they start to ask them these questions, right? These specific who, what, when, where, how, they mute, because that is not going to be used against them. Now, I was told in the beginning, judges aren't going to like that. Well, honestly, I haven't had anybody say that they don't yet, because we're getting the immediate response, right? We're getting that excited utterance. We're getting so much right away. You're getting to see the state, just the state of the survivor and kind of what's happening. And you're hearing so much. But why do we need to hear this? They're going to give that to us later. If a judge or the prosecutor later decided that they don't like that, okay, we'll unmute it, because that's still going to be one, though. You're not getting my detective that night, because the SANE's going to ask those questions too. So I don't want 3 statements in the matter of, the first 5 hours. I just don't. So who? Do you know them or you don't? Now you can imagine that that public safety threat goes up if we don't know the perpetrator. A little bit different. Bets are off. We're probably going to have to ask some more questions, especially if we say we don't know the perpetrator and they're armed. Okay. Then the CI, yes, we'll still do the CI, but I got to tell you, my detectives are coming out on that particular incident. If they're armed and we don't know them, that's a threat to public safety. We don't have a choice. We have to come out and try to get a little bit more information. That and or that, if they're potentially going to die from their injuries, we come out then. But those are the only two times. The crime type, this seems, I'll get to that, Emily, I'll get to your question in 1 minute. The crime type, this seems weird, but the truth is, you know, the cab looks different, the computer aided dispatch. And I've had victim advocates ask me before, this says sexual, whatever. It was something the way the computer put it. But so sexual assault, it can mean a lot of things. It doesn't just mean rape, right? It could be sexual battery, it could be rape, it could be child molest. So just so you know, sexual assault is just like a catch-all, right? But here's the thing. So when officers go, they have to determine like, okay, were we sexually battered? Were we actually raped, meaning by the Indiana Criminal Code? Was that penetration? So, and if so, where were we penetrated, right? We have to know the crime. And we have to know that not only for our investigation, but we have to know that for the sexual assault nurse examiner, right? We have to know what is it that we're looking at here. If it's within the last 120 hours, of course, we're sending them straight to the hospital, right? To get their exam. I will tell you this, we'll go back to it a little bit later. If they're outside that 120 hours and they are within that first week and or even 2 weeks and they have concerns, I still, although they won't be an acute, I still try to encourage them or make it to where they can go get a sexual assault examination. It's more for their peace of mind and emotional security, as well as making sure that we don't have any, diseases or any injuries. So I will still do that for any of you that come across that. 120 hours or less, yes, we're looking for evidence. We know that. Um, but I can tell you again, if we're still trying to be survivor focused, you got to consider that sometimes we might need to do that if we're around that 2 weeks. Now listen, if we're 6 months later and they're not reporting that they have some injury or potential STD, then of course we're not going to do that. But usually within that 2 week time frame, I will still try to get them in without an acute. We always have to ask, where did this happen? The jurisdiction of the crime. Because we are a bedroom community here in Brownsburg. We're not a big city. So we have a lot of people who live here. That's what bedroom community means. Live here and don't work here. So we're more of a residential than we are a metropolis. Although actually we're a metropolis by definition, I suppose. But we don't have a lot of business, if you know what I mean. Oftentimes, we'll have people come here, they live here, and they report that they were sexually assaulted in Indianapolis. Okay, so we have to make sure that we're also protecting the integrity of IMPD's investigation, or maybe it's Beech Grove or whoever, right? But we just make sure to get them to the right people. And of course, how? We're always looking for those things that are demonstrated as elements in the criminal code, which is force. How did they demonstrate the force? Was it holding you down? Was it the threat of force? Was it the threat of weapons? Did you see weapons? Do you have injuries? That's kind of what they are doing as the patrol role's public safety statement. Now I'm going to go to Emily's question. Do the officers make it known to the victims that they are muting their body cams when doing so? I don't think that they verbally say, "Hey, I'm muting this." I think they just do it, right? Because again, we're not trying to elicit a different response, right? We want to capture the true and accurate depiction of what's in front of us. So no, they're not announcing it. No, it's just a simple bloop. It's very simple. So I feel like announcing it might harm us. I could see a defense attorney, oh, well, that's interesting right after that, so no, they do not announce it. Oh, don't apologize for nothing's obvious to anybody. We're all just in here learning. Great question. Great. But Emily, also, I was curious, like, where was your train of thought when you asked that question? Like, there must be something that you're focusing in on the muting that you think that that's either a great idea or by stating that, or you think it's a great idea telling them that they're muting them or don't. So when you have a chance, will you write that in there so I could just see kind of what mental space you were in there? Interested to that. So of course we've already went through this. I'm not going to do this. Oh, but I do want to point out on the what. I want to make a big point here. So depending on your discipline and how you interact and when you interact with these survivors, we're all going to get a different person, and that's okay. But understand this. So when when we are interacting with the survivor right there in the moment, You can imagine we get all different kinds of responses, erratic, stoic, it's all, and none are wrong. But unfortunately, what you can say is that we all many of us would agree, like if I said, uh, she gave him a blowjob, we would all probably know what I'm referring to when I use the slang term blowjob, right? But the truth is that when you're dealing with these types of crimes, we can't do slang, just like we don't when we're interviewing children, right? So, like, for instance, when our officers respond right there to the scene to, a survivor, and the survivor is saying, I was raped. So we have to say, and they've got these little cards and they're all laminated and they go from this card. But I explain to them, if they say rape, you have to probe a little bit more there. You have to say, oh, rape means different things to different people, and it means something different to the state of Indiana. What does rape mean to you? We have to solicit them to try to explain to us penetration, because quite honestly, a lot of our younger generation, everything is sexual assault, right? So sexual battery, no penetration, so we have to know, was there penetration, and if so, where? So understand that this is one where I've encouraged the officers to, okay, and they just say that line, listen, rape by the Indiana Criminal Code is very clearly defined, but rape means different things to different people. I'm sorry to ask, but can you please tell me what rape is to you? Now, usually they say something, quite blunt, but the bottom line is we now have our answer, right? So there you have it. I do want to point this out just on this slide. We did that part, but I'm always looking for multiple scenes because, as we know, sexual assault doesn't just happen one time in one place. So, this is another reason cognitive interviewing is key, because if you're truly dealing with somebody that has just been released from maybe, hours of criminal confinement, multiple sexual assaults. Heck, that could have occurred over multiple jurisdictions and multiple scenes. So this cognitive interview is super important because you might not get that right away in that first statement. You should, but again, it goes back to, if he or she says, "Well, they picked me up in Indianapolis. We went here, here, here. They assaulted me in the car, and then they assaulted me here." Right, so I already know that I have 2 scenes, and again, it goes back to the gain versus lose. I can still serve a search warrant and get all that, right? Like, I know. So, it depends on where the car was, but at the same time, it's our investigation now, and we can work it out later. I do wanna point out on the how, they do have to ask, like, when they say, "Well, he forced me." Okay, well, how exactly did they force you? "Oh, he held me down." Okay, that's fine. I do ask them, like, because sometimes they don't understand he threatened harm or kill is a big thing for, being compliant. I think they're better now, but that did take a little time for, I mean, heck, we have juries who struggle with the fact that, I had a case years ago where these two were engaged and they lived together. They had been together a couple years. They broke up. And he was very, very abusive. He put her in the hospital a few times during that 2-year relationship. She moved here, got an apartment. It had been a year. He showed up at her apartment door. He wanted closure. She let him in, and he had been drinking and I don't know what else on. But the long story of the short is that, he sexually assaulted her. The jury had a real hard time, and I had a real hard time to get the prosecutor to take it. She was compliant. And there is nothing wrong with being compliant if you already know this person had already victimized her so many times in their relationship where they had put her in the hospital. She just wasn't willing to risk a beating or her life. So she gave in. Now he considered, and I'll be honest, the jury struggled with that. We got a hung jury, and she didn't want to go forward again. And that's understandable. But understand that that's a lot, like, we can have compliance sometimes where you have to really work to get your prosecutors to understand that is force. Compliance, if there's a mental component or previous, batteries, I think you can prove force. And I'm willing to try it if the survivor is. I always ask them weapons, witnessed, threatened to use, substances, and most important, injuries. Like, as you know, when we are injured and we are already so hyped up with the adrenaline, we oftentimes don't recognize the pain and we don't know that they're injured. So I make sure that my officers are asking, do you feel pain anywhere? And even if they say no, I ask them to sort of visualize when they've asked the question about force, like, how did he hold you down? I ask them to start to try to, like, watch them. Are they holding their ribs? Are they holding their wrists? Things like that. Any questions before I go into the detective's role? Okay. Um, so we've already sort of talked about all of this, so I'm not going to go too crazy here because I've already talked to you about like I'll still do, the sexual assault kit about 2 weeks for health risks, general concerns. Remember, part of that is they get to see a therapist, a counselor during that sexual assault nursing examination, where they're sort of getting that the attention that they need, the mental health attention they need. Of course, we're contacting the victim advocate. I will say that I don't know how many advocates are in this class. I assume many of you are non for profit. I assume that some of you work for prosecutor's office, and I also assume that not many of you work for law enforcement agencies. I have my own victim advocate. I lobbied to hire a victim advocate back in 2019, and we have had one on staff for the last 6 years. Unlike the advocates who sit at the prosecutor's office who typically don't maintain the level of confidentiality. They typically will tell the deputy prosecutor any information that they think will affect the case. My advocate here, her name is Kim Schubert. She has full confidentiality. She doesn't have to tell any of us anything. I just ask that, if she finds out something from a survivor that is going to, negatively impact the case, that she just very, very, gently encourages them to tell us, but she still has that full scope, just like most of you do for non for profit. So what we do is I do send my victim advocate to the hospital. Okay. They will go down there and all they're doing is they do take backpacks in the event that someone does not have, clothes. We have sweatpants, we have, sports bras, all the things. We have a cleaning kit for them. We have hygiene products. We have flip-flops, you name it. So they get to come home. So either my advocate will take them to the hospital from the police department, or it doesn't matter if they want to go pick them up from the scene, that's fine. And they get them home, or they meet them there. It's totally up to our survivor. But they go there and they're really just there to provide a little contact card. And it just makes sure that they understand who they are. It gives them all of every single detective I have in this division, who I am. It has their case number on it. And it just reminds them, hey, we're going to be in contact with you, to set up your interview. Because you can imagine that when they're at the hospital, there's so much information being thrown at them. They're talking to so many people and they truly just forget. It's just a lot. Again, traumatic brain on top of just having to interact with so many different people and walking away with all these papers. I do find that our sweet little victim advocacy card is perfect. Again, on the front, it's every single number they could think of with emails and names and who we are. And on the back is their victim rights. I really like that idea. But she goes to do that. While this is all going on, I told you we're already doing search warrants or whatnot. In this 48 hours, we're doing everything we can. We are working this case. We are interviewing other people. We are looking for video surveillance, whether it be in the city, whether it be at the bar, wherever it is. We're serving search warrants on phones, social media, you name it, whatever's relevant. We are plenty busy in the first 48 hours while we're still allowing our victim time to recuperate and prepare for this interview. Okay. Obviously, we are responsible to go pick up the sexual assault kit. We consult with the sexual assault nurse examiner to make sure that there's nothing on the report that we are maybe a little unclear on, whatnot. We do review that report once it's available. And then we make sure that you guys understand. For us, the hospital enters the kit, right? And then we of course make sure that we track it here and admit it on our side. Just make sure that you guys know, because I think some agencies have reported to me that their property and evidence custodian are entering the kids into the SACI. So I just want to make sure that you guys know that. Goodness gracious. We contact the victim to set the interview for the cognitive time frame. Like I said, one interview, no more than two. We do confirm that the victim's rights have been provided. Those are links, but if you guys go to the, oh my goodness, why can't I think of this? IPAC site, you will see these these victim rights forms as well as a brochure. So if you ever go to the IPAC site, don't worry, they're there. ICGI has them as well. I think I have the ICGI one in the link here. So just make sure if you're law enforcement that they have indeed had their rights read to them. Now they do it at the hospital for us, but once they come into this building, I still make sure if I don't see it right there in the kit and stuff that we've already had, then I make sure and I'll stop and do it again. I keep them on hand. So, obviously we're trying to cooperate, not in a good investigation, you're trying to corroborate what your survivor has told you. You're not trying to debunk it. And I think again, it just requires us coming from a different perspective lens and understanding that if we're doing it this way, though, it's much easier, right? If we're not doing that traditional police interview so many times way before we even had the formal interview, right? Then we are set up to try to corroborate everything that the survivor says rather than trying to tick away at everything that they said. We're always consulting with a deputy prosecutor or prosecutor on these cases, right? They're always guiding us in some way. And then we like to interview the suspect last, just so you all know. That is one of the last things we do because again, you do not sit across the table from somebody and ask them questions that you don't already have answers to. But also at that time, typically, I have more warrants and I'm taking things, I'm seizing things, right? If we're lucky, we're filing charges and we're consulting with the victim advocate to prepare the ICJI paperwork. This is such an interesting slide. This is where typically, if we're in an in-person format, there's a lot of exchange, and I'm a firm believer that we all learn from one another, right? I think my approach to the world is if you walk into the room and think you're the smartest person in the room, that's the quickest way for me to know you're not the smartest person in the room. So, if you don't come to a forum or if you're coming into this profession in the criminal justice realm, right, and you don't understand that we all have so much to learn from one another, then you're already failing. And I suggest you step back out and re enter with a more open mind. Not one of us are perfect. Not one of us have all of the answers, but I can assure you that if we all keep one goal in mind, and that is we truly are working towards the same goal, which is providing the most effective, conscientious resources and services while maintaining the integrity of a criminal investigation for our survivor. And you're always putting the survivor first in your own respective discipline. Okay. If we all agree, then really we can pretty much work through anything. But I will tell you, it's when we don't acknowledge and respect that our various disciplines, we have different procedures and protocols, and we have to respect those. We have to, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, we just have to respect that that's the way they are, and we've got to find a way to work around that and through that. So, with that being said, I will tell you this: as you walk through your career, excuse me, you're going to find that not all of you advocates in here are the same, right? You all vary in type. We already talked about it. There's some at the prosecutor's office. There's some very few in law enforcement. I think that Kim, we are one of maybe 6 in the state that have an advocate sitting in a police department. That's a huge thing for me and this agency and the community that we serve because often what happens is that if we don't have someone from a nonprofit in that role early on, so what happens is for us during the course of the investigation, you don't have an advocate out of the prosecutor's office because there's not technically a criminal case yet, right? So I found that there was just this huge lag and it was taking so much time from me, which we'll get into that a little bit on another slide, but it was just unreal that what are we doing in this space here, right? There's so much space in the investigation that our survivors weren't getting attended to, right? So that's one great way and reason to keep an advocate at a law enforcement agency, right? Kim fills in that gap until it gets to the prosecutor's office. And many of you in non for profit, I mean, that also I assume is probably how you're doing it as well. But we do it for about really any victim crime, right? And she's just there to answer questions even. She provides check-ins and it's just something that I feel is, quite, uh, it definitely bridges the gap between community and law enforcement, and it makes it all approachable, right? But just know that you're not all the same, and some of what you guys, the confidentiality levels are different, right? So understand that as you're working around. So law enforcement, you have to remember that as well. You have to understand that what your advocates are doing with the prosecutor's office are not the same as what they're doing in non-for-profits. Same goes for investigators. So they're not all the same either. It really varies upon the jurisdiction in which they work and their type of specialty, if applicable, because I tell you, not every agency in this state is large enough to have investigators who specialize. I think probably many of you have already realized this. It takes a lot of money and time to become a specialist in the field of crimes against persons, whether it be, child molest, child exploit, child abuse in general, the umbrella, right? Sexual assault, DV. It takes a lot of time and money that smaller agencies do not have. They just don't have the resources, they don't have the finances. So some of you are going to be getting uniformed officers that are going to answer the call for service from the report of sexual assault, and they're going to follow all the way through the investigation and understand that their expertise and their area of knowledge is limited. They're going to do the best they can, like all of us, but it is limited. Okay. Um, and I say that because when your two worlds combine, one of you may be operating at a different level and you may be setting some expectations that are a little unrealistic, right? And when you sort of start to understand and know your area, then you start to be able to understand, okay, each role, and you have to establish the professional boundaries. That is key. I can tell you this. If you are out there, let's say I don't know your area, right? But I would encourage you to go to whatever law enforcement agency sits in your area of jurisdiction. I would encourage you to leave your cards for either their investigations division commander, because you're usually going to get, a detective. But if they don't have one, leave a card for the chief, the assistant chief. Ask for a meeting, ask for a coffee, something, because I can assure you, off the typical uniformed officer, they do not know what victim advocates do, and they would not even know how to use you. Now, you know, in my agency, we have one, but the truth is that a lot of agencies don't have access to one, or they think they don't, right? So it's up to you to get out there. It's up to you to introduce yourself. And for me, I know this to be very true. People need to be able to put a face with a name, right? You have to establish a relationship in which they know they can trust you, because law enforcement is a tight little world, right? We handle a lot of confidential information, and we certainly do not release that in any way, or we can lose our jobs, right? So establishing professional boundaries and trust and respect is key. And I will promise you this, if you get to a place where either one of you have, overstepped those boundaries, once that's lost in law enforcement, you'll never regain it. So I encourage you to, work closely, work effectively, communicate so that everybody understands their roles, everybody understands their limitations. Without that, nobody can be of service to anybody. It is not a war out here. We are not trying to do who's going to be better, who's going to be worse. Like, I think it reminds me of one time years ago, I had an advocate call me and say, it was completely, she had misunderstood the entire situation. She starts explaining a situation to me where she went to a police department, went into the lobby, got on the phone, was trying to get, a uniformed officer to take a report with a survivor, right? And she was talking to dispatch, but didn't realize it. And they kept using the sexual assault. And this really upset her. And she was just like, explaining to me how she called it, I went into victim advocacy mode. But then she started to explain to me how basically she was yelling at this dispatcher and really just giving him the what for, and thinking that it was what she was calling some dumb police officer. And I hope that while I'm telling the story, everybody's already like, oh, yeah, that's not good. Not only that there are just so many things wrong with that story, but I think more importantly, it's like, make sure you understand who you're talking to, the role, and that in this scenario, it was her. She did not have the education. She did not have the experience, and she made it so difficult for the survivor that was standing there. You can only imagine if you are losing your professionalism, but calling it, that you're championing or trying to disguise it as you're championing for your victim. I can assure you that's not, you're not championing for them. Like, that is causing more stress and tension than is necessary. And now it will almost make your survivor feel as if they're pitted between you and law enforcement. And that's exactly what we don't want. Okay, so let's talk about any law enforcement out there, the benefits. I mean, I had to just sort of throw some ideas up here so that, you could understand as a detective all the benefits that I get from using an advocate and collaborating with an advocate. They are really endless, but I tried my best to just sum them up. Time management. I mean, time management and being able to focus on the case. Back in the day, when I'd have these cases, as I've mentioned before, I would always try to make sure that I was in, constant communication with my survivor. When my survivor would call, I'd stop everything I was doing to take their call. And unfortunately, they needed they needed sometimes just an ear, right? They needed support. They needed more of what I would consider a mental health counselor or a victim advocate's role, right? But we weren't using advocates like that, 10 plus years ago, right? And so I would often spend an hour or two listening to my survivor, sometimes scream and curse, and they would be mad at me over things that I could not change. I can't change the law. The law is the law. And they needed someone to listen. They needed to vent. Sometimes they would call and just cry and they would be scared. And other times they would want information. Same with it's always their friends and family. They also. And because I was always trying to be very conscientious of that, I would take those calls. So you can already see so much of my time spent managing the survivors' emotions and the aftermath of the trauma, as well as their family and friends, that I was being distracted from my case investigation, right? And it 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 was very frustrating because you wanna be everything to everyone, and I started to realize, "Oh my gosh, I cannot do both effectively," right? And then I would feel bad because my survivor wasn't getting the attention that they needed, and then, of course, you can imagine what those phone calls would look like later if I would choose to focus on typing a search warrant or interviewing somebody else rather than answering that call right then and there. And then I'm human too. So after a while of being yelled at, cussed at, and then cried and apologized to, I start to, have my own issues. I'm like, okay, I don't want to deal with you anymore because every time I talk with you, you emotionally dump on me. You are definitely, trauma dumping on me and it's affecting me. So when you have a good collaboration, guess what? None of that happens. None of that happens because I'm not taking those phone calls. You are not taking those phone calls as the investigator. Your victim advocate is. That's what they're there for. That's what they're trained for, right? You need to focus on the case. I'm not saying you don't take a call from your survivor here and there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's super simple for you to keep yourself out of it. And that way you don't start to feel resentful towards the survivor because I'm here to tell you, we all know they can say some pretty hurtful things. I get it, but we are also human too. If we're respecting that they're human, they've got to respect that we're human. So let's just be honest about it and say, you know what? Let's distance ourselves from that emotion and let's use our advocates because we can now be way less biased, right? Because the more we keep doing that, the more biased we get towards this person. So when you use a victim advocate effectively, I'm now able to focus on my case. My time management it's more geared towards the actual investigation and I'm distancing myself from the emotion. One of the things that I love is that I can go into my advocate in any time and say, "Kim, can you call, Jane Smith and let her know here's the new update." Now, the truth is Kim's so great. She's usually already looking at all that. She's looking through our case report. She's looking through our supplements. She's always watching any new filing, whatever, right? But we all do that. So then our survivor is getting open communication, but constant open communication rather than them. We very rarely have one calling in and saying, "Hey, where's my case at?" Because they are so well informed. The other thing about not taking as a law enforcement officer, taking the survivor's calls so much is because remember I said earlier, we can't unknow what we know. And so the more times we talk and the more slip of tongue because we're upset or whatnot, the worse it becomes because we have to record that in the sense of we have to say, hey, I talked to this person on this day. They said this, right? That can start to create a record of misunderstanding. And again, that misinterpretation, because now we've got those layers of emotions, we've got our biases involved, right? So now I don't have to record, oh, I talked to Jane Smith again. She once again expressed her frustration because of, of the statute about rape, whatever, right? I don't have to have all that. I don't have to have the record that can be used against Jane. And more importantly, it, if we get to trial, the jury doesn't get to see Jane, who already had another issue. They don't get to see Jane trying to process this and use it against her, right? That's what's important. At the end of the day, you get the overall improved case investigation and ultimately prosecution because, again, we're providing everything that we've documented to the prosecutor's office for review. And there's nothing in there let me say this. We have minimized the things in there that could be used against our survivor. When we use that advocate, we are able to be better investigators. I'm not saying that you should not ever speak to your survivor. You should. And in fact, hopefully you're the one doing the cognitive interview, right? But I'm saying you need to distance yourself a bit and let that advocate step in. If I have law enforcement in here, you're more than welcome to ask questions or step in, but I'm going to just keep going to the next slide. I think I already talked about this, but we'll keep going. We've already talked about the higher comprehension involvement. I think we already know about the wraparound services and resources, but I will tell you this, advocates, law enforcement, everybody will admit, law enforcement, you don't know what resources are out there. I can promise you that. Your advocates definitely are in tune with that way more than you. I'm not saying that all of you, I'm just saying that me, I can't keep up. There are so many resources. I cannot keep up and do my job effectively. These advocates, that's what they do. So just know that, they can provide these wraparound services that you wouldn't even dream that were there. That's a big benefit for our survivor through that victim advocate collaboration. I think as law enforcement, the thing that I want to stress again, and we talked about this in the cognitive interview. And when we're doing that, we're effectively giving them back that power and control. And we're reducing those feelings of victimization the best we can from the law enforcement side of things and the criminal justice side of things, right? As I've said, we do not every case belongs in the criminal justice system. And not every survivor wants that to happen either. So what you always have to remember is that how we move forward though still will make an impression on the survivor forever for the rest of their life. And so that interaction needs to be positive, right? We need to provide a platform in which their voice is heard and respected. It doesn't mean we have to agree. I can't change the law, but I can certainly respect what it is that they have to say and I can hear it, right? They also walk away knowing that we all were invested, right? The detective, the prosecutor's office, the advocate, right? We were all invested. We all had our own roles, but we were all very much invested. And the number one priority was the survivor, right? If this is all done right, if this is all done in the perfect world and we all three have collaborated in such a way that these benefits for the victim have been met, then guess what? Oftentimes our advocates go out to advocate for other victims. And that is what I love to see. Because when you find an advocate who's been through the criminal justice process and has been treated with such dignity and respect and has been openly communicated with and heard and has a good positive experience, they are your biggest allies. And that is how we move forward through these processes. So I will say, some of you will know them. I hope some of you aren't them, but I have come across advocates now who are advocates because of a terrible interaction that they've had in the criminal justice system or with law enforcement. And those are sometimes the hardest to move past because, again, you bring your bias with you and it starts to affect others. And when we do that, we're projecting a sense of ourself that we should not, right? I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying, or I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I understand it. I'm saying that it doesn't afford a space in which we can all collaborate professionally. So I always hope that we can make sure that we're generating and producing advocates who will truly go towards the profession and advocate for all of us to collaborate together, if that makes sense. Okay, I am done. I'm going to leave this up here for just a few minutes for you to copy it down. I'm not sure if you guys all if you get a copy of this somehow electronically, but I'm going to leave this here for a second.
Yep, we will follow up with a recording of this session as well as the presentation. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to speak up or add them in the chat right now for Jennifer Barrett.
I'm going to give you these references just because I did throw a lot at you about cognitive interviewing and whatnot. So I'm going to put that up here for just a second. If there's any other,
I had a question.
go ahead.
So, first of all, where are you located again?
Brownsburg, Indiana, Hendricks County.
Why can't there be like 5 of you and why can't one of them be here?
I don't know that you want 5 of me.
It's less about me and more about the victims we serve. I just feel like it would be a good energy. Do you have any recommendations on how we might soothe some of the tension between advocate and officers? And I ask that because I try my best to be cordial with them and to build positive relationships, but I don't always get that in return. And it has been my experience that many officers, well, I mean, I've literally been told, you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, actually, you don't know what you're doing. I know. And it's hard. Like, I don't attack them like that, but in my head, I'm like, okay, right, cool, you're in the wrong profession. And there are some detectives that won't contact my clients. And then my clients call me and they're like, I can't get a hold of my detective. I'm supposed to do this. I haven't heard back from him or victim assistance. And then I know I get frustrated with that because it's their job to inform the client about what's going on because it's their case. It's their livelihood, and I just feel like many of them keep them kind of in the dark for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know, but it's incredibly frustrating when I have a client who is having a mental breakdown every fucking day because nobody will tell them what's going on with their case and they don't know how safe they are or how safe they aren't. Like nobody's communicating. So if you have any ways to, I guess, bridge maybe the miscommunication, or I don't know maybe the right word for it, but I guess how can I better cooperate or
Collaborate. Yeah.
collaborate with the PD and the detectives and things so that, because this presentation has been super informative. Um, it's really helped me understand the processes for the casework because
Yeah.
before I didn't know what the police officers really did. To me, it always felt like not much. But I'm in Fort Wayne and like we have a big, like, well, we've got a pretty decent sized, police force and stuff, and
You
like
do.
we have a domestic violence section for of detectives and stuff, and I don't know how I can reach them and how I can better make myself more agreeable with them because I just feel like we get ignored a lot. But I don't want to be disrespectful either because I'm trying to
I
make
get it.
friends.
I get it. There are several different things I'm hearing here and several different ways in which you can approach it. I think first and foremost, Fort Wayne is probably obviously it's your biggest agency that you serve, I imagine, right? Like that's a pretty large agency. So I'm wondering, it sounds as though somewhere probably prior to you, some relationships were maybe fractured. Is that a possibility?
I definitely think so.
Yeah.
I think there's
Okay.
a lot of turf war around
That's
here.
what I'm wondering. Is it because it feels like it's organizational? You know what I mean? Like that's what it feels.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and I'm just saying it feels that way from based on what you're telling me. One thing that I listen, leadership comes from the top, right? Decisions come from the top. So while I respect that, you have to have eventually you are going to have build these relationships with these detectives who specialize, right? I can tell you that they have a supervisor somewhere. And that's not disrespectful. It's not disrespectful to send an email and say, "Hey, I'd really like to, meet with you for a cup of coffee or something to kind of chat about our organization, what we can offer, and things of that nature." Because when you hit that person, so whether that be, I assume over there they're probably being ran by lieutenants, maybe captains. When you find who runs that section, that's who I'd go for. Because when you reach that person, see that then starts going down. Hey guys, I met with this person. I think we need to start utilizing this a little bit more. But some of that is about education, right? If they've never been educated the benefits of the collaboration, unfortunately, that's going to be on you, or you've got to bring somebody like us in, right? So that's on you to sort of talk to them about the benefits of the collaboration. But I would suggest you get to whoever runs that unit. And I'm also, does Fort Wayne not have a victim advocate in there? Are they one of the law enforcement agencies that have one of their own?
Yeah, they have
So,
victim advocates that
uh-huh.
work for the prosecutor or the police.
They might be the police department. I think they were one of the few agencies, and I'm wondering if that's also contributing because they feel like you don't need to they might be seeing your organization like, "You don't need to do this. We have advocates inside that we work with." I'm wondering if that's part of it. So, I would also try to research, and I think they have their own advocates. If I were you, I would also find out who the supervisor of the advocates are and bridge a relationship with them. Because if they
Yeah.
respect their own internal advocates, they just need to learn. I do feel like there was a fracture somewhere, and this is definitely not about you, but obviously there's been something that's happened probably between the organizations that there's some trust lost. But it does come from the top. So maybe reach out, find out who those advocates are, and or reach out to the sergeant, the captain, whoever that is, and try to have an in-person meeting, right? And somebody did say, "Are you part of a SART team?" And I do know that you guys have a SART team up there. But you probably don't. Do you attend the SART meetings, or they already have that slot?
No.
Well,
I
yeah.
um I work for a nonprofit.
Okay.
We're a non-residential DV for a provider for support and assistance. We do intervention, prevention, and support and advocacy. I do support and advocacy, and we get a lot of calls from people in situations, and they want an advocate. And I am an advocate. I have all the rights and the special treatment things of saying no to subpoenas and stuff like that for it. But I definitely know there have definitely been some rocky patches before I started this job. I actually, oh my God, today is my 3rd year anniversary of doing this.
Congratulations.
Yes, I completely forgot. So it's just been 3 years. And there are definitely people that have been doing it longer than me. But there's just some stuff that just doesn't make sense. And I feel like I'm single-handedly trying to repair old bridges, and I'm just always looking for ways to better facilitate that.
I know some people up in investigations in Fort Wayne. Why don't you shoot me an email, and that way I have your contact information, and I'd be more than willing to call over there and see if I can't get your foot in the door for you. I know quite a few people over there.
I
Uh,
would adore you for the rest of my life.
I'll give it the good college try. I don't know how effective it'll be, but I know quite a few over there, or up there, I should say. And yeah, why don't you just shoot me an email, make sure I have your contact information, and let me call up there and just see sort of what could be the issue. But one of my friends is a lieutenant up there. Like, we're not hanging out every day, but friend, work acquaintances. Let me see if I can't see if I can get the finger on the pulse of what's happening, and then maybe I could better guide you.
Yeah, because I'm totally willing to meet and talk and try to resolve whatever might be,
Absolutely.
like, lingering. And, like, I don't take it personally. I fucking wasn't there.
That's
But
the first step, right? Like, you
yeah,
being willing to do it.
yeah, but it's about the people that we serve and less about us. And I feel like
Exactly.
if we can just, build up this a better partnership, then the people that we serve are going to benefit the most. And that's the end goal.
Yeah. I agreed. Agreed. That is the goal. So, yeah, send me an email. Let me see if I can't, I don't know. Let me see if I can't figure something out for you a little bit, and then I could probably better advise you. Because I really also need to know, like I said, I need to see if maybe some of the contribution to this is if they have advocates on staff there too. So shoot me an email.
I sent you my email just in case, so that if it goes, because sometimes we go to spam. I don't know why.
Okay.
But just in case, so that you know what that is. But yeah, yeah. And I'm not trying to encroach on other people's territory. I just want to help, So
Well, right. That's exactly why most of us are doing this, right? And I think that's the other thing. We all tend to, every now and again, we all forget that we got in this to help people. And so we shouldn't be fighting internally, right? So we're all here because we want to be of service to some degree, and we shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves. We all have the good hearts that are required to carry out this work. And if I didn't thank everybody for joining this journey in your professional career, I am now. Your work will oftentimes be thankless and very difficult, but I certainly appreciate and respect you for joining the ranks with us. So good luck, anybody and everybody.
I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation and the informative information that you provided, but also with your last interaction. Thank you for modeling how to do very effective and good um, connecting of resources and expanding those resources to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love when I hear something that actually works. If I always say if you walk away with one piece of information that I maybe, I don't know, inspired you or made you even provoke some sort of possible change, then I feel like I'll always keep doing it. But thank you so much. You guys have been more than welcoming and more than supportive. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, I'm actually a law enforcement based advocate and I'm located in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. So we're just about an hour south of the river. But I think this presentation has been very helpful. I've actually took down your information as well because I think your insight and the way of conducting the interview and even the conversation prior to would be very beneficial to our patrol officers. And I think it's a good way of connecting the two and how we treat victims differently versus when it's our own internal investigation. So I think that's a very positive outlook. But one of the things and one of the key aspects that I took upon taking this role, so we've had victim services for almost 2 years now, and I started it November of 23. But one of the ways I connected our parole and our detectives to the community advocates was when we started, we didn't have any kind of financial funding. So the resources that I had to be able to help victims were from community partners other than just myself. So
Yeah.
I was really tried to pull those community partners in and use those resources to help build and kind of make us all cohesive and provide more holistic care to the victims.
Bravo. Bravo. And I know exactly where you are when you said Elizabeth. I know exactly where you are. So bravo. And I'm so glad to hear. So are you the only victim advocate over there then?
I am the advocate for the city. The sheriff and our KSP, our state police, do have advocates. They play a little bit of a different role than I do. My title is considered victim services specialist, but I am doing kind of a mix of advocacy and social work and just community outreach. And my background is SANE nursing. So I've been a SANE nurse since 2011. So I have kind of a mixed
Yeah.
background.
You've got a little bit of everything. Well, thank you. Yeah, that congratulations. Love to have you on this side too. You're probably very effective in your victim specialist
I'm
job.
always happy to help wherever you guys need anything.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think someone has their hand up.
Yes, that's me.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Abby. I'm a behavior manager in Sheriff's Department, Marion County Sheriff's Department,
Okay.
and I'm the only sexual assault advocate here. But one of the challenges we have is that the county does not really have anything in place for advocates, sexual assault advocates. So we have to, go to Google, talk to agencies and see if we can get something for them. Sometimes we go to our book out to see if there's something there. But I was thinking the county itself should have a program for sexual assault victims, which we don't have in place, though we have a sexual assault advocate, which I am. So it's kind of funny and not funny because when we recruit to help the inmates, they kind of, what is the benefit? What are we getting out of this? What is there compensation? Different kind of questions. And all we can offer them is the same thing we offer the vocal clients. So some of them are not speaking up because they're like, that's no big deal. You guys are not doing nothing for us. As much as we want to, as much as I want to, I would have loved that the county, the department, sheriff's department, the states, work on that advocacy for sexual assault in such a way that it will be grounded and they will feel heard and they will feel, um, happy to some extent, even if it's been years that it happened to them.
Absolutely.
I was a sexual assault survivor. I was a domestic violence survivor. So when I listen to their stories, it kind of trigger my trauma too. But how can I help these people? There's really nothing in place. So I don't know if there's anybody here that has something for them, shoot it to my email that will benefit the inmates. Because I know that a lot of agencies will be like, once they're incarcerated, we can help them. Or if the assault happened in the jail, there's nothing we can do. So all that kind of threw me off the ground. Like, so how do we help these people?
Hubby, where are you at again? What county?
Marion County Sheriff's Office?
You're in Marion County, Indiana?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And you're just having a hard time getting like some wraparound resources for your
For
victims?
sexual assault victims,
Really?
particularly for them, not the general one that they will see with other inmates for VOCA.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you know what? Can you also send me an email because there's a plethora of people I can hook you up with. I
Okay.
just need to plug you to the right people so you can ask the right questions
Yeah.
and get to the right info. So shoot me an email, please.
Okay.
Um,
I will.
and then I will start working on that. If you guys all give me at least till next week, I'll start working on that because you have so many resources over there that are I think so literally underutilized.
Okay.
So
Okay.
now I say that and then watch me find out that you don't have
Okay.
yeah, right? So
All right. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Then again, you can email me, call me, whatever, but I just want to make sure that we're addressing everybody's questions that may have them.